the Tank Museum had a fame problem. No one really knew who we were. They didn't know where we were. They didn't know what we were. I remember introducing myself to people, saying where I worked, and they'd say, "Oh, the Tate Museum."
What made you believe that this whole venture could work?
We didn't have any money, so PR was really the way that we were going to make the Tank Museum more famous. And when social media came along, that was pretty refreshing for us, because it meant that we could go directly onto these social media platforms without the filter of any of the media organisations and tell our stories directly to people who hopefully would want to hear them.
Are you greeted as a pioneer or a madman at that stage?
If the point of me spending all this time and effort on kind of creating YouTube content was to get people to come and visit us, what does it mean when actually you're talking to the majority of people who are unlikely to ever be able to do that? And there was a conversation at board level at that point, which was just like, well, what is the point of this? And that's when we had to go away and think really hard about what the point of it really, really was. And that's when we realised that there was all this reach gave us a massive opportunity to raise funds for the Tank Museum, and that set us off on a completely different journey.
Was there a moment, one video, where you thought, yes, we're onto something here?
No, sadly, if it was a Hollywood movie, it would be a terrible Hollywood movie. There was kind of like a series of what I call little kind of like light bulb moments and little kind of victories, which slowly compounded and accumulated over time. Like I said, this is a very long-term process, and that's why I could never have predicted that we'd have ended up where we are today. But I think one of the things which really set home to me how important this could be for us was actually there was a volunteer at the Tank Museum who made a very basic video about what it was like to drive one of our tanks, and I don't know how many views it had at the time, but it seemed like a really, really big number. And so I realised that there was clearly a potential for this. There was clearly an audience for this. There were clearly lots of people like me who were spending quite a lot of time, too much time arguably, watching YouTube videos.
The algorithm. Do you create content to chase it, or are you more of the opinion that you create content in the knowledge that the community will eventually come to you?
The YouTube algorithm is actually very, very simple. And if you want, I can give you the secret to hacking the YouTube algorithm. World exclusive. Are you ready for this?
So how are you doing today, Nick?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
No. As I was saying offline before we press record, the pleasure is all mine. Nick, let's dive straight in. Take me back to the beginning. Museums aren't really known for crushing it on YouTube. The Tank Museum, last time I looked at least, was at 1.2 million subscribers. What made you believe that this whole venture could work?
So if we go right back to the beginning where this all comes from really is, since I've been at the Tank Museum, which is a very long time now, I started working there in 2004, so 20 years ago. Basically, we're this small, rural, regimental museum in the middle of nowhere. And, I was the only person really working marketing there at the time. And, the challenge, well, if you like, the fundamental marketing challenge we had is no one really knew who we were. They didn't know where we were. They didn't know what we were. I remember introducing myself to people, saying where I worked, and they'd say, "Oh, the Tate Museum." And I'd have to correct them, and they'd invariably be disappointed when I said, no, the Tank Museum, because no one knew what that was all about. So, very early on, I think I realized that the Tank Museum had a fame problem. So it's always been, and it still is, a big part of my role to make the Tank Museum more famous. And I understand a lot more now as to why that is really, really important. And it's basically that if you're famous, people will come to you, they'll seek you out. But if you're not famous, you have to buy all of that attention. So being famous for any brand is, of course, really, really important. So going back to sort of 20 years ago, we didn't have any money, so PR was really the way that we were going to make the Tank Museum more famous. And of course, we'd use magazines to get the word out about the Tank Museum. We'd use stories to get in the local newspapers and the national newspapers to get the word out about the Tank Museum. And when social media came along, that was pretty refreshing for us, because it meant that we could go directly onto these social media platforms without the filter of any of the media organisations and tell our stories directly to people who hopefully would want to hear them. And so we already had quite a big following on Facebook for the time, back in 2008, 2009. And it was 2009, 2010 sort of time that we launched the YouTube channel. And again, for me, it was all about using social media almost as an extension of our public relations activity, simply to get the word out about the Tank Museum.
Nice. So, in those halcyon days, did you ever sit down and think this is going to be the strategy, or did it naturally sort of evolve?
it definitely evolved over time. So obviously where we've ended up now, we could never possibly have imagined when I got started that this is where we'd be today. And I think now we can almost sort of rationalize the strategy of saying, well, obviously this was all about using content marketing to increase intellectual access to the subject matter of the Tank Museum, and then acquiring and engaging an audience, which we can then, target to sort of diversify our income through modern fundraising schemes. But that's really, as I've explained, not really what we set out to do. It's just about saying, hi, we're the Tank Museum, we're over here. Please don't, forget about us. You might be interested. Please come and visit. But of course, as our social media audience grew, we realized that the vast majority of that audience were probably unlikely to ever be able to come visit the Tank Museum by virtue of the fact that, well, even now, only about 25 to 30% of our YouTube audience is actually based in the UK, which means the vast majority are not. Given that it's difficult enough for us to get people out of London to come and visit us down in Dorset, those people are very unlikely to be able to come and visit us. And actually, that was kind of a key moment in the evolution of our entire sort of social media strategy, because if the point of me spending all this time and effort on kind of creating YouTube content was to get people to come and visit us, what does it mean when actually you're talking to a majority of people who are unlikely to ever be able to do that? And, there was a conversation at board level at that point, which was just like, well, what is the point of this? And, that's when we had to go away and think really hard about what the point of it really, really was. And that's when we realized that, there was all this reach gave us a massive opportunity to raise funds for the Tank Museum. And that set us off on a completely different journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really inspirational story, and one that it fills me with so much natural curiosity, because it's been such a sort of at the vanguard, successful. Most organizations don't manage to achieve what you guys have achieved. And I've seen you present about this, and with that benefit of hindsight, I guess that story does become quite linear. But you're in these board meetings, you're sort of suggesting, actually, there's a big opportunity here with this newfangled thing, quote unquote, social media. Are you greeted as the pioneer or a madman at that stage?
I mean, I'll let you guess. I work in the museum sector. Basically, in the museum sector, particularly the independent museum sector, senior exec teams and boards, they tend to have, for obvious reasons, they tend to have a very kind of financial first mindset, right? So that basically means that almost every activity that a museum undertakes gets reduced to a cell on a spreadsheet to basically say, are we being efficient? Are we being effective? And I get that. I completely understand that. That's really, really important because, of course, there's lots of museums at the moment that are having, quite a hard time. And, alongside that, of course, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that, financially minded people really don't like marketers anyway, because, we just spend all money, and they see it as a cost to be reduced rather than a form of value creation. So they're immediately very suspicious of everything we do. But this obsession with, getting everything down to a measure that goes into a spreadsheet so it can be reported to the board and put in a graph means that museum marketers tend to be forced into focusing on more sort of short-term, direct response kind of activity to justify their existence. And that means that because the longer-term stuff, the brand building activity, the PR activity even, because that's a lot more difficult to measure, it's really difficult to get board members and, senior managers to actually value it at all. And so it doesn't get done. And I think that whole mentality is actually really holding back any organization that's affected by that kind of mindset is going to find itself that it's being held back as a result of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And, I'm completely in agreement with you. So, was there a moment, one video where you thought, yes, we're onto something here. This is going to work out. I've put the house, bet it on black, and we're going to go. We're off to the races, chaps.
No, sadly, I mean, if it was a Hollywood movie, it would be a terrible Hollywood movie, but there would be a moment like that. But it wasn't really like that. There was kind of like a series of what I call little kind of like light bulb moments and little kind of victories, which slowly compounded and accumulated over time. Like I said, this is a very long-term process, and that's why I could never have predicted that we'd have ended up where we are today. But I think for me, the realization was about YouTube as a potentially very useful platform for us as the Tank Museum was. YouTube was relatively new at the time, but I was personally quite fascinated with it. I love that whole ethos of, its strapline was broadcast yourself. And I thought, well, this is very novel and very democratized. And, this is very interesting. And I watched a lot of YouTube then, and I still watch a lot of YouTube now. And of course, YouTube has changed enormously since then. But I think one of the things which really set home to me how important this could be for us was actually there was a volunteer at the Tank Museum who made a very basic video about what it was like to drive one of our tanks. And I don't know how many views it had at the time, but it seemed like a really, really big number. That video is still online now. It's got about 1 million views. So at that time, it probably only had about 40 or 50,000 views. But to us then, that seemed a hell of a lot. And, it still is.
Yeah, no, it is.
And so I realized that there was clearly a potential for this. There was clearly an audience for this. There were clearly lots of people like me who were spending quite a lot of time, too much time, arguably, watching YouTube videos. It also, reinforced something that we'd already discovered, which is that, online on social media, it was easier for us to seek out these niches of people who are much more enthusiastic about our subject matter than the general population. So for me, that was the moment that made me think we should be taking YouTube seriously, and dare I say, we should be having a go at it ourselves. And so from then, I think the first video that we put up on YouTube was a video I actually made at home on my own computer, which was promoting a minor fundraising appeal that we did. Made this video myself. It didn't take very long. Uploaded it to YouTube. I can't really remember how quickly the fundraising target was achieved, but it was great to be able to use this YouTube video as an asset in support of this promotional campaign. And it wasn't really very painful to produce. It was only a 1.5 minute video. It was actually very straightforward. And yet it seemed to be very effective. And so from there, we just tried out lots of different things. After that, recorded some of the work that was being undertaken in the workshop as part of this project, and those videos went down really, really well. So, every little video in itself was a bit of an experiment, which just encouraged us to take it the extra step further.
Yeah, no, fascinating. So I was in the previous episode, I was speaking to Hayden Carruthers, who's a massive fan of yours and of the work of the Tank Museum. And, he's massively sort of pushing this sort of ideology or idea. Ideology is strong. That more museums need to, start thinking like creators and producing content like creators, which, I'm totally on board with. But I think one of the sort of, just hearing sort of, you speak there, is that actually very, very refreshing in the sense that I can tell that you are clearly a YouTube addict. You're somebody that's spent a lot of time. No, I'm not saying that as in a derogatory sense. It's meant complimentary. This sort of, I guess, the way in which you were sort of terming that, the experimentation, the constant iteration. Yeah. So what is it about YouTube? Obviously, there's that you published broadcast yourself idea, but what as a marketing tool and a marketing platform, really interests you about it on a sort of personal level?
I mean, video is really powerful, isn't it? I think, we're all at heart quite lazy. So if we can watch something, it's way easier than reading about something. And I know you're partial to an audiobook, am I right?
Oh, yeah. For sure. Indeed.
For some reason, you can listen to an audiobook whilst you're doing other stuff. So it's a very powerful tool, but also I thought it worked quite well with our subject matter. Tanks are big objects. They're quite sort of cinematic in a weird way, particularly because a lot of our collection moves around. A still image will not do it justice in the same way that moving image does it justice. So that for that reason, it on paper at least seemed to be like a really, really good way of making it work. And I did a journalism degree, so I'm kind of very much from this storytelling background, and like I say, this idea of using, in my head, some of the first YouTube videos that we were making were almost like video press releases, which probably sounds like a terrible idea, but it was just that same way of, well, we'll take a news release and we'll whack it up on the website. Well, actually, let's make a little video out of this instead, and it might be a bit more engaging, and we'll actually be able to show some of those concepts in a bit more detail, and they'll be more interesting as a result. So that's what it was about YouTube, I think, for me.
Yeah, no, I think that sort of that producing engaging content that tells a story, there's so much value to that. So if we were to break it down, what, as we sit here today, are sort of the key ingredients to the Tank Museum's YouTube strategy as it currently stands?
So there's two key ingredients, I suppose. Well, the first thing is obviously having, good content, and we can unpack what good content actually means. So I kind of try and work by six rules that I have for good content, and those are as follows.
Right, first, books out, people.
Yeah, that's right. Get the slide out. The first one is consistency. I think consistency is really important for any content creator. And consistency for me is about showing up in the same place at the same time in a way which your audience can get used to. So that consistency is important. And then it's about communicating with them in a consistent way, in a consistent tone of voice, and also being consistent, I think, with their expectations as well, because then the audience will get to know you, you can get to know them, a bit of a relationship can build up. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is originality. YouTube, of course, is a very an increasingly competitive platform. So I think every creator, particularly now, that is going to stand any chance of standing out, needs to figure out what their special sauce is. What is it that they're bringing to the party that no one else can do? And obviously, the Tank Museum, we're very lucky. There's plenty of other people talking about military history out there, but we're very lucky in the sense that we've got the stuff, we've got the vehicles, we can climb all over them whenever we want, we can show inside vehicles and lots of other things that other people talking about tanks and military history can't do in the same way. The third thing is really understanding the audience, really understanding the niche, and basically creating specifically for that niche, nobody else, because that's really, really important in building the loyalty of that particular audience. And so everybody, when it comes to creating online content, needs to basically pick their niche and stick with it. The next thing I think that's really important in good content is generosity. This is all about like almost leveraging your own input bias and making the content as valuable as possible for the audience that are consuming it. Because, what we've seen, what content creators have seen over the last few years is that audiences who appreciate your content will reciprocate the value in one way or another. So if you make the videos as interesting and as informative as possible, you will earn the right to get their audience's attention. The next thing is accessibility, and accessibility online is all about, making sure that you're presenting your ideas and your information in platform appropriate standards. So for YouTube, long-term videos, it's slightly different as it is for TikTok, but in every case, it's about, making it digestible, pleasurable to consume, in context with the other content on those platforms. And probably the final thing and the most important thing is authenticity. And that's all about kind of creating authentic content which has some relationship, some meaningful relationship with the kind of the spoken brand of, in our case, in the spoken brand of the Tank Museum. So we're not going to do anything online that we wouldn't do on site, if that makes sense. And it's that authenticity, that almost brand personality piece, which is what allows you to build those more meaningful relationships with audiences, because it's clear what you're actually all about.
And yeah, no, absolutely sound advice there, and some really good pearls of wisdom. But on that authenticity piece, a lot of your videos, the Tank Museum's videos, this is, feature members of staff and volunteers, etc. Was that, as we sit here again, you have that benefit of hindsight. Was it an easy sell? But I guess what were the challenges of sort of that journey?
Yeah, so I mean, it was always intentional to use members of staff because, we weren't going to buy in actors or anything like that. And so it made sense to use, when you're talking about a subject where it helps to have an expert in front of the camera, why not get an expert in front of the camera? We were very lucky as well to have, a number of members of staff who are actually very comfortable in front of the camera as well. And that's really important. And it is a bit of a skill, and it's not something that absolutely everybody has. So I appreciate that we were very lucky in that regard. And also very lucky that the members of staff that we put in front of the camera actually, I think, quite enjoyed it as well, and were quite happy to do it. So I never felt that we had to sort of, hold people's arms behind their back to sort of make them speak in front of the camera. I think the challenge we had, if anything, is wanting more of their time than they were actually able to give us. So there's always that kind of tension with content creation that you want to perhaps, there's deadlines, you want to make more than you can. Production process can get a little bit lumpy at times. I think internally, the biggest debate when it came to doing YouTube was the idea that somehow giving away the level of content that we were giving online for free, giving that away for free, would in some way undermine the museum experience as a whole. And that, for me, was the biggest point of tension when it came to sort of, advancing the idea of the Tank Museum sort of having a successful YouTube channel. There was some voices in the museum who genuinely thought that there was a major risk if we started doing all this stuff for free, no one would come to visit us, for example, which we now know is a completely, ridiculous argument. But I understand it's an argument that persists in lots of other organizations today who are a little bit sort of, behind where we are in the journey with regard to all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And was that, that tension, was it because of that sort of fundamental lack of understanding and appreciation of that actually your online audience completely different from those that visit you, so actually you're talking about two different ponds of people, or was it actually just sort of, coming down to that kind of idea of value and freeness, and actually if they can access it all on site, all online, then what's the point of coming all the way down to Devon? Dorset. Dorset, yeah.
Yeah, both. I think it was both of those things. So yeah, you've got that kind of misunderstanding of the kind of people who are actually watching, and dare I say, where they're watching it from, but also that idea that we shouldn't just be giving stuff away for free, that we've had to effectively pay to create. So one of the early conversations that was happening at board level was the idea that all this content we're creating should almost go behind a paywall, because surely then everyone will come to our website and, give us their credit card details just to look at video. So, and it's partly that, on paper, that's not a perfectly rational idea. What we now know is that model doesn't really work unless you can spend a lot of money on building the trust of the audience in advance. And of course, we don't have that money. So for us, it's better to go where the people are, so we can build our own brand on that platform and build the trust from the quality of the content we're creating. So it's the creator economy model, right? The way that we've sort of approached it is much more aligned with, I hate to use the word Mr. Beast because he is the king of YouTube, really, but it's that same idea that you basically create content, you put it out there for free, and you use the relationship you build with the audience, the credibility you build with that audience to generate revenue. We're just applying it to a not-for-profit organization.
Yeah. And then, of course, once you do reach a level of community, you then have that sort of paywall option in terms of, memberships of increasing tiered levels. And I've been astounded at some of the monthly costs of the content. And that's not me being astounded for the eye-watering sums, but just actually, I think it is reflective of both the loyalty to which that community is invested in the brand now, but also actually is a reflection of the true quality and value of all of those tiers.
Yeah, it is. But I think winding back to the reason why we're doing it, and fundamentally the reason why we're asking people to support us is obviously, no one's, no one, unlike a content creator, we're not trying to get rich out of this. Well, the message we're putting across is that, and our reason for doing this really is to raise funds because we're a charity, and those funds can be applied to supporting our charitable objectives. So in some ways, the ask is almost a philanthropic one.
Correct, yeah.
And we're treating it like fundraising, in the same way that the RNLI would go out and raise funds, and we're basically saying, hopefully people think our content is good enough to be paying what they're paying for it. But ultimately, fundamentally, what we want them to be confident about is that money is being applied to our educational mission across the museum.
Yeah, no, it's very innovative and entrepreneurial in terms of, the identification of the opportunity and the way in which you could, take the framework and apply it in a completely different sense to achieve a very similar outcome. When you reflect on, do you think that it's innovative, or is that something, it just made sense,
I think it is now, because everyone tells me it is. It just made sense to me at the time that that's what we had to do, particularly if I wanted to carry on playing with YouTube. I had to find a way to make money out of it. I think the other thing that happened almost 5 years ago to the day was COVID. And I think the whole, everything that happened around lockdown basically poured rocket fuel on this strategy, because whilst we had been looking at monetization, to use that rather vulgar term, the whole scenario of lockdown, made us really take it very, very seriously at all. Because of course we had to close our doors. We make all of our revenue, the vast majority of our revenue comes from paying customers. So when we have to close our doors, that's a really big deal. And so we took that opportunity to really focus on the revenue raising. And that's when we really worked hard on bringing in new members to our Patreon scheme, not just our Patreon scheme, but our other membership schemes as well. And, we sort of worked with those brand partners to try and create more activity, which gave us a platform for additional revenue fundraising. And that's when we were also able to really focus on pushing our e-commerce as well, which grew fantastically in that first year of the pandemic.
Yeah, no. So I was really struck by, and this is sort of picking up on an earlier point, but in your sort of 6-point framework, stress the idea of niche and, really owning that niche. Now, I agree with you, and I think it has benefits. How does that idea of, nicheness sit with the age-old and very tiresome sort of desire and want by some? We need new audiences, we need more, we need bigger, better. I sort of suspect that actually you are also an advocate of that new audience, but you're sort of saying that actually, hang on, the pond that we're fishing in, we're only capturing a certain amount of that. There's still plenty of more within that pond that we can capitalize on. We don't need to be, doing TikTok dances.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's a really interesting question. But of course, as a museum, it is our fundamental responsibility to society to be appealing and telling our story to the widest possible audience. And that's what we do at the museum. That's the role of the museum, is to bring people in and introduce them to the subject. I think online, we're trying to do something slightly different. And what we're trying to do online is, like I say, it's fundraising. So like any charity, you take your collection pot and you put it in the room which has got the most people who are already warm to your mission and understand what you're trying to achieve, so they're more disposed to donate money to you. So going back to the RNLI example, I say that because my wife works at the RNLI, they're going to be finding themselves far more likely to raise funds in coastal communities or among people who own boats and that kind of thing, right? So for us, we're obviously going to find that our charitable mission is going to be considered more worthy of support by people who already have an affinity to the subject matter. They're enthused by the subject matter and they like what we're doing. So online, we are targeting people and we're giving people information which we know they already want, right? And this is all to do with how social media works. This isn't an intentional thing. This is just the way it works. It's, algorithms have developed to give people more of the content they already like, which is why my YouTube content feed is full of tank stuff. and not full of cooking stuff, because I don't watch lots of other cooking content. So I'm not going to, I might trip over it, but by and large, YouTube thinks, well, this guy likes tanks, so I'm going to populate his feed with as much military history content as possible. So it's not like we're saying anyone who isn't a tank enthusiast is excluded. The reality is they've got their own interests, and social media is not the place where we're going to necessarily convert them unless they're going out looking for it. So for us, it's far better that we spend our time and effort, in this case, penetrating, if you like, penetrating that market of tank enthusiasts. And online, it's a big, big, big ocean that we're fishing in. Whereas on site, I estimate, or we've estimated in the past, that real tank enthusiasts probably only make up about 10, 15, 20% at push of our total audiences. Online, it's 100%.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really neat summary. Seeing those two online, on site, or online in real life, however, in real world, however you want to term it, as two distinct. Obviously there will be, on your Venn diagram, potential overlaps, but
Yeah.
You're treating two different sets of people broadly for two different needs. So you mentioned the dreaded A word being the algorithm. Now, I think I know what you're going to say here, but do you create content to chase it, or are you more of the opinion that you create content in the knowledge that the community will eventually come to you?
So again, this is another fantastic question. And it's a really interesting one, because it links with the conversation I was having at another sort of event somewhere else where I'd also spoken. And it links with the idea that peculiarly in the museum sector, there's this idea that if what you're doing is popular online, it must be in some way vulgar, which is kind of really weird and counterintuitive. But there is this kind of suspicion of kind of commercialization and kind of like, mass culture and that kind of thing, which I find quite interesting. But the YouTube algorithm, I think in particular, is particularly misunderstood. And I think algorithms are in general, we almost treat them like they're sort of pagan gods that need sacrifice, kind of thing. But for me, the YouTube algorithm is actually very, very simple. And if you want, I can give you the secret to hacking the YouTube algorithm.
Go on, please do.
World exclusive. Are you ready for this? All you have to do to succeed on YouTube is make great content that your audience really is delighted by. And it's as simple as that. So why I'm pretty sure that's the case? Well, that's kind of what YouTube tells us, to be honest with you. But the algorithm on YouTube is basically, what we think of the algorithm is basically their recommendation system. And the reason the recommendation system exists on YouTube is because YouTube wants to improve the viewer experience. It wants to improve the user experience. So that means it rewards creators who create content for YouTube that YouTube viewers want to watch. So if you have a video that gets lots of views, that's because it will have had lots of impressions, and it will have had lots of impressions because it will have had a particularly high watch time, a particularly high view-through rate, and there'll be other signals, indicators that the YouTube recommendation system uses to figure out the level of quality in that content, and therefore the kind of people it should be showing that content to see if they watch. So, yeah, I think being aware of those things is really important to help the creator make better content that YouTube audiences want to watch. But I think someone at YouTube said this themselves recently, is that when we talk about algorithms, we should just substitute that word with audience, if that makes sense. So you could almost ask me the same question again, but substitute the word algorithm for audience, and it would be a very similar answer, I think.
Yeah, no, fascinating. So with that in mind, obviously, you've referenced in previous sort of answers, experimentation, iteration, but you are very much given a clarion call for just create good content. So how does the Mr. Beast approach of the 100 thumbnails and the optimizing for SEO and titles and all of that, how do you begin to layer that on top of great story?
Yeah, no, that is important, and we do have to pay some attention to that kind of thing. And like all things, it's marginal gains to an extent. You know, the key thing is having a really good video, and you can look through your YouTube recommendation page now, and you'll find videos where the thumbnail, you know, isn't perhaps up to the same kind of standard of what Mr. Beast might be doing or what some of the other really big creators might be doing. But then they might have a slightly different audience that that might not be looking for those kind of crazy, exaggerated thumbnails. And that's certainly something that we found out. You know, every audience will react slightly differently to different cues and different signals. But the reality is that we're very well aware now that the thumbnail and the title of a video really is responsible for 50% of the success of the video, because if nobody's clicking, nobody's watching. And if people don't watch, you've wasted your time. So, you know, when it comes to storytelling, the thumbnail and the title are where the story starts in YouTube. And that's quite different to other forms of media, because I guess what we're saying on YouTube is that people really are judging books by their cover and deciding whether or not they're going to invest their time by clicking on that video and spending time with you as a creator.
So in terms of the practicality side of things, 1.2 million subscribers, a journey of, you know, sort of 2008, roughly 16, 17 years. How big's the team? Who have you got doing what? Don't need to name names and what. But, you know, from my, you know, sort of rather ignorant position here, I'm sort of imagining a small media production team at this sort of, you know, at this stage.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it is. We have a media team, and I appreciate we're very fortunate to have that. But I always like to say, make it very clear that that's not how we started. It's only really in the last couple of years that we've grown in the way that we've grown, and the reason we've grown in the way that we've grown is really to reinforce the success that we've been having. So we have a team of, sort of, with a manager. We've got 2 camera operators and editors. We've got somebody whose role it is to basically arrange the production assistant, basically, whose job is to arrange the shoots and that kind of thing, make sure, because, you know, it can be quite difficult to film the amount of content that we're trying to film around a museum that's a busy visitor attraction. There's, you know, things going on all the time. We have 2 people who write and create content, and the rest of the marketing team will pitch in and sort of assist with other forms of promotion, community management, and, if you like, managing that onward journey from consumption of content to whether that's membership or e-commerce or any of the other sort of actions that we want people to be taking. So, yeah, it's become a fairly big enterprise. But, you know, when we first started doing YouTube really seriously, which I suppose was back in sort of 2016, there was really only, you know, the curator in front of the camera. There was the camera operator who started his career at the Tank Museum as a volunteer, and, yeah, a bit of assistance from the marketing team. So it's come a long way.
Well, yeah, no, for sure, it has, and it's still going strong as we speak now. So, putting you on the spot slightly here, what do you think most brands and/or institutions get wrong when it comes to YouTube?
Well, I think actually probably the most important thing is the example I gave earlier about how museum marketing teams aren't allowed to spend time on brand building activity, or at least not allowed to spend an adequate amount of time on that brand building activity. I think that really fundamentally is one of the things I think stopping other museums, arguably, perhaps, you know, doing what we've been doing, whether it's on YouTube or any other kind of form of social media. So that's the key thing for me. But I suppose the second thing is where you have that lack of sophistication, perhaps at sort of like senior leadership team level, at board level, is I think there's some people doing really, really great work in museum comms teams or whoever's kind of creating their content. That's not necessarily joined up to a strategy which really makes sense, perhaps, in quite the same way. So I think you know, museums need to be careful that the noise they're creating on YouTube, on social media, actually ties back to some kind of meaningful objective. So, for example, we wouldn't do a paid advert without inserting a call to action of some kind in that advert. So for me, I think doing social media, which isn't underpinned by some kind of meaningful strategy, means that there's a lot of attention going to waste, and that seems like a shame.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, despite the fact that, social media is now pretty mature, I think, circa 20 years, it does often feel that, sometimes there's a little bit of, well, not even a little bit, there's still a little lag and a bit of immaturity into, unlocking that potential for certain sectors, and arts culture being one. So you've referenced the creator economy and how that sort of has led and really been a driving force behind your approach to strategy and content creation. But of course, another great benefit of taking that approach is brand partnerships. And Tank Museum has got to be it's got pioneering in the sense that you've partnered with some epic people, World of Tanks being, an obvious example, but there's not the only one. So what does, a successful brand deal? And that's got to be the most creator sort of question I think I'm ever going to ask for a museum. What does a successful brand deal look like to the Tank Museum?
So this is an area that we have to be super careful with, as I'm sure you can understand. I mean, there's plenty of examples in the museum sector, not online so much, but of kind of working with sponsors and that kind of thing, where it doesn't quite align with the values of the organization. There's something, or at least it doesn't align with the values of the supporters of the organization. There can be all sorts of reasons why it can go a little bit wrong. So I think even relatively small brand partnership deals for online content, there still needs to be, because of the nature of our organization, there still needs to be an overlap of values, objectives, and relevance to the audience as well. And I think for me, it has to be a partnership that will genuinely add value to both our audience and their audience, as it were. So I've turned down probably thousands of pounds worth of sponsorship opportunities because the products were just, they didn't make sense. I don't feel like a Tank Museum video should really be promoting VPNs and gaming chairs and, things that, you can't really imagine the curator of the Tank Museum promoting a gaming headset or something like that. And it's not feeling extremely weird. So I haven't done any of that. And, games like Clash of Clans and that kind of thing, what's that got to do with anything? And I don't think our audience would like it. And actually, you have to be really careful because you can get a couple of $1,000s for doing these things. But actually, if it really irritates your kind of core audience base, what's the point? If that means they're not going to watch your next video, then actually the cost is greater than the immediacy of the return. So for us, the only real big partnership we've ever done is with World of Tanks. And that works because it really it's not your average brand sponsorship deal. I mean, we do that. They have sponsored our content, but we've always done it in quite creative ways. So, for example, where we've wanted to tell a particular story about a particular tank battle, we'll have used World of Tanks in-game footage, if you like, to illustrate and tell that story. Because, of course, there isn't any Pathé footage of sort of battles, and it can be really difficult to illustrate these things, and rather boring if you don't try and find creative ways to do it. So for us, that's a really kind of it makes sense for us to be promoting the game in that context, and it makes sense for us to sort of accept the sponsorship of that video because we're using that product in a sort of a way that feels quite genuine. But also, they've sponsored our events as well, and they've done things. So, for example, during COVID, during the pandemic, they sponsored an online Tank Fest event for us. So Tank Fest is our big annual fundraising event where we get vehicles out, we run them around, 3-day event, 24,000 people. In 2020, the fact we couldn't hold that event was a major, major blow to our finances. So they were kind enough to sponsor a online Tank Fest in where we were able to use that as a platform to raise additional funds, not just from our own audiences, but also from the World of Tanks audience as well. So that was a really good example of a brand partnership that wasn't just purely transactional.
I mean, yeah, so many questions that arise from that. Just again, it comes back to that sort of pioneering, entrepreneurial, opportunistic kind of spirit that I sort of sense that that you have in abundance, but just seeing the opportunity of that perfect brand partnership and the fact that you can then get exposure to leverage their audiences and capitalize on that is, I mean, I guess one part of me goes, isn't that great? Isn't it new? Isn't it fresh and funky? And the other part of me is just like, it's kind of old school marketing, really, isn't it?
Well, it is. There's nothing in this that's particularly. I mean, we're just using different tools and different tactics, but ultimately, I'm an old school marketer, I suppose. I did the CIM and all that kind of thing. That, yeah, it's just applying those things to an online audience in a slightly different way than others in the sector have done before. And because we're the type of organisation we are, you have to be entrepreneurial, because the risk of not being entrepreneurial ultimately is failure, isn't it, really? So, we're in a much better position now, sort of following COVID, because we were able to take advantage of a lot of these things, and we were willing to try these things. We were willing to do the experimentation before COVID actually happened. So we were in a good place to sort of, make sure that it wasn't a disaster for us. And, COVID was a very difficult time for our sector. We were very lucky to be in the position we were when we were.
Yeah, no. So, in terms of, well, I guess I've always wanted to ask you this, actually. The Tank Museum's heralded for being, a unicorn in the world of, YouTube museums. But, constantly throughout this, you've sort of used YouTube in that wider sort of lexicon of social media. And actually, the Tank Museum is also smashing it on TikTok and other platforms. Does it ever sort of annoy you that this, I mean, I guess it probably is an annoyance, but that sort of fixation on, this shiny silver thing being YouTube? Hang on a minute, we're also doing great stuff over here, chaps, as well. Could we talk about that for a change?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm always, flattered to have an opportunity to talk about what we've done, what the team's done. I think, we're very proud of what we're achieved, because, going back to where we started, which is that, tiny regimental museum in a quiet corner of absolutely nowhere. So I think, we're always proud to talk about the work we're doing. And I think it still surprises people that because we are the organisation we are, that we've managed to achieve so much. And so, yeah, I don't mind the context or the lens under which that work is being examined. It's something we're very proud of.
And sort of, the journey's been long and arduous, no doubt, but has there been a most rewarding moment or moments?
Yeah, there's been a few, really. I suppose, like, personally speaking, I was really chuffed that we won the Museum and Heritage Award for Marketing Comms Campaign last year. That is regarded, I suppose, as like the Oscars of the museum and heritage. And it's always nice to be recognised by your peers and that kind of thing. So yeah, that felt really, really good. But there's been lots of kind of moments like that in the entire journey. It's been really rewarding for me to grow the team that I've grown, to bring on some incredible young talent. Sound like Brian Clough for a minute there, but Paul Famaggioro, who is one of our content creators, is an enormously talented guy. He's sort of, running our TikTok presence, and he's the guy who creates all the shorts for our YouTube channel, which have been a really important part of our growth on YouTube in the sort of last year or so. Reaching 1 million subscribers. I know it's a vanity metric, but you get a little plaque, don't you? So that's nice.
Different colour to the 100k one.
Exactly. You've got to put something on the wall in the office at the end of the day. And I think, the other one is that proving, I think we've proven, exercised our own demons, and that's proving people wrong. And that might sound a little bit sort of petty, and almost sort of Alan Partridge-esque. But, there were genuinely people who thought if we were giving all this stuff away for free online, the museum would collapse in on itself and no one would come to visit. And actually, the opposite's been true. We've just gone from strength to strength. we've had, the last 2 years have been the two most successful years from a visitor footfall perspective that the Tank Museum's ever had. And long may that continue, because first and foremost, we might be doing very well online. It might be a very interesting side hustle for us, but, first and foremost, we're a museum and a visitor attraction. And it's always better for people, I think, if they can come down and see the museum for themselves. Which is an invitation, Stephen. You've got to come down and see us sometime.
I mean, I absolutely will. Absolutely will. So, this podcast is, my vehicle to sort of, explore the world of the chronically online. And obviously I get the, the pleasure of being able to curate, the guests to which I see, that speak to that. But I'm always interested. Would you classify yourself as somebody that, is chronically online?
Sadly, yes, I probably would. Yeah, probably. I mean, we touched on my YouTube addiction earlier on. And sadly, I am chronically online. I'm slightly obsessed by social media. I'm slightly obsessed by news and current affairs, and, it's happening all the time, isn't it? 24 hours. So, yeah, I describe myself very much as chronically online.
And do you think, and this is something that I've wrangled with, is it possible to reach that nirvana where you're not chronically online, but you're still very good in internet culture?
Yeah. I mean, that is it. I think, part of my excuse for being addicted to the internet is that I need to stay current. And part of my excuse as to why I should mindlessly scroll through Instagram and TikTok and YouTube is that I need to know what's going on. And I think there is actually fairly good truth in that, isn't there, really? Because you can quite quickly lose touch with things. Things move very fast online. You think how much TikTok's changed in the last 4 years.
Well, it almost got banned, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And how much YouTube's changed. And so if you want to stay relevant, you've got to understand, and as a brand, if you want to stay relevant, you need to understand what relevance means. And I think the only way you're going to understand that is by living it. But also, I think as a leader, I think it's important to me that I can give my team appropriate guidance on this stuff. And, one of the issues we talked about earlier is that lack of sophistication, if you like, on senior teams and on boards of museums and charities. And so, I don't want to find myself there. I want to make sure I can make a meaningful and informed contribution.
And on the, there's obviously undoubtedly a privilege to be able to associate your name to the work that the Tank Museum are doing online, and then also as a knock-on effect of that, sort of travel the world and speak on stages, collect awards, put up plaques in the office. But, is there, well, what is, that's soon. What is the...
an intense moment about to happen.
Yeah, what is the flip side to that? What are the pressures of being the person or being one of the people that gets to steer that ship?
Well, I think there's I'm not aware of anyone who's succeeded on social media who hasn't fallen off. And so, that could be me tomorrow, that could be us tomorrow, that could be the Tank Museum tomorrow. What happens if, I don't know, Musk buys Google or something and, bans the Tank Museum, and there's all plenty of ways we go. So there's plenty of pressure in terms of, I suppose there's a self-imposed pressure of trying to sort of stay on top and stay in the lead and all of that kind of stuff. That's personal pride stuff. Really. I don't think that really matters at the end of the day. I think primarily, as long as we're ploughing our furrow for the Tank Museum and the Tank Museum is getting what the Tank Museum needs to out of it, does it really matter? Not really.
We're heading towards the conclusion, and I could talk for another 2 hours, but to be honest, nobody needs to hear that. And but where do you think that the future of the channel? What does it look like 5 years time? Bigger, better. What are your aims?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's difficult to predict, isn't it? Because the social media landscape, the whole online landscape is very, very difficult to predict at the moment. And again, if you look back 5 years ago, how different YouTube is today. So, I mean, anything can happen. I suppose one of the things that we are, I'm particularly conscious that we probably need to do is look at ways where we are perhaps less dependent on YouTube as a means of distributing our long form content. And there are other avenues that we can look at that. I don't know if they'll be successful, but we're going to have a look at them and see where it takes us. And I think the other thing, which is probably interesting and worth exploring, is you talked about how you broaden the audience on YouTube. I don't think we'll be able to broaden the audience on YouTube by using one channel in the future. So I think actually we're going to need to, if we want to do that, we'll probably have to think about setting up a different channel and targeting it ever so slightly differently in order to sort of broaden the audience. So yeah, those two things, ironically, slightly at odds with each other. On the one hand, I'm saying, yeah, maybe we'll start some more YouTube channels. On the other hand, saying, well, we're going to be less dependent on YouTube. The key thing is, though, is audiences, whether it's on YouTube or anywhere else, that the audiences will always really respond to content that's been created with integrity and passion and authenticity. And that's really what we need to keep doing.
Yes, no, for sure. And then the last question, if you could collaborate with anyone, who would it be and why?
I mean, it would be cool to collaborate with Arnold Schwarzenegger just because it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I think he would make a fine YouTube presenter for the Tank Museum channel. So, you know, if he's watching this, and let's face it, he probably is, it'll be a call. We'll sort that. I don't know. Because, you know, we've been fortunate. We've done quite a few collaborations with different people over the years. And, you know, a bit like brand partnerships, collaborations you have to be quite careful with because, of course, you know, we're a serious subject at the end of the day. And we don't want to make light of the subject matter that we're doing. So, I mean, the only collaborations, so we've done some collaborations with other, you know, military history YouTubers, and they've been very, very successful for us. And we've come up with some great stuff. So I genuinely, at the moment, to be boring, I don't really think there is anybody else out there at the moment who we haven't collaborated with that I've got a burning desire to do so. And the other end of that is I can think of some things that would be probably YouTube gold that would probably get me sacked, such as, I don't know, maybe like a tank cooking YouTube video with Gordon Ramsay. That might be interesting. Ridiculous challenges with Mr. Beast, where basically if you can stay in the tank the longest, you get to keep it or something like that.
I mean, now we're talking. Well, thank you very much, Nick. I'm personally looking forward to the day that I watch a Tank Museum video and hear an ad read for NordVPN or Surfshark.
Never going to happen.
But unfortunately, as you've just said, that's never going to happen, and nor should it. Nick, thanks very much for your time. Where can people find you and follow you?
LinkedIn, Nik Wyness. I'm quite easy to find because I've got a slightly unusual name.
Yeah, no, definitely give Nick a follow. And of course, make sure that you subscribe to the Tank Museum. So thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you so much for having me.